In the annals of the Great Crusade, where glory was earned across the stars and legion rose against Xenos, heretic, and stubborn human alike, few designations carry the same weight as Warsmith. To understand how this title came to define the Iron Warriors, one must return not to a battlefield, but to a forge, not to a coronation, but to a crucible. The Iron Warriors Legion, fourth among the Emperor's 20, were not born into the role of siege masters. Like all legions, they were shaped, hammered by hardship, tempered by obedience, and honed by their gene father, Perturabo. But it was not until the middle decades of the Great Crusade that the term Warsmith first emerged from the smoke and fire of legion warfare. Before that moment, the Iron Warriors bore the same ranks common to all Astartes: captains, praetors, commanders. These titles, while adequate, lacked the precision Perturabo demanded. They belonged to a system that rewarded personal valor and battlefield charisma, concepts the Lord of Iron distrusted. Perturabo did not want heroes, he wanted instruments, minds capable of orchestrating annihilation with mathematical precision. As the Fourth Legion advanced across the stars, their role became unmistakably clear. They were assigned the impossible tasks, siege after siege, fortress after fortress. The Emperor sent them where resistance calcified into stone and steel. Their victories came at enormous cost, but their reliability was absolute. The Iron Warriors broke walls, crushed defenders, and buried the remains beneath artillery craters. Yet, within the Legion, friction was building. The Iron Warriors fought wars that others avoided, and with each campaign, Perturabo grew increasingly disillusioned with the existing chain of command. Too many commanders lacked the creativity or ruthlessness necessary to prosecute siege warfare at scale. Too many relied on outdated thinking. Worse, some had begun to emulate the heroic posturing of other legions. Perturabo saw in this a sickness, one that would rot the core of his forces if left unchecked. It was then that he acted. The Legion's existing command structure was dismantled. Officers were evaluated not by their charisma, but by results. Those who failed were demoted, reassigned, or erased. Those who excelled were elevated and reshaped. From this brutal reorganization, a new rank was forged: Warsmith. It was not a reward, but a burden. Not a badge of honor, but a collar of responsibility. To be named a Warsmith was to be acknowledged as the master of total war. Siegecraft, engineering, logistics, psychological warfare. A Warsmith did not simply lead, he calculated, constructed, and destroyed. He became the architect of the battlefield, turning terrain into weapon, weakness into opportunity. Every Warsmith was expected to bring with him not just a sword arm, but a mind capable of conducting planetary-scale warfare like a symphony of iron and flame. This change was more than semantic. It altered the DNA of the Legion. Each Warsmith was given authority not over a single company, but over a grand battalion, a composite force equipped for autonomous war. Infantry, armor, artillery, orbital assets. Everything needed to break worlds. They were commanders, engineers, and tacticians all in one, and each was expected to reflect the calculating brilliance of their primarch. But the title was not easily earned. Before being named a Warsmith, a legionary had to demonstrate mastery in siege doctrine and combat logistics. They were tested on the field, given partial control over operations, scrutinized for faults. Any sign of glory-seeking or unnecessary loss was enough to end their candidacy. Some were eliminated by peers, others by Perturabo himself. There was no room for ambition divorced from function. By the later stages of the Crusade, the Iron Warriors were no longer simply a legion of Astartes. They were a machine of war built around its Warsmiths. each one a central cog in a greater siege engine that spanned battlefields and battle zones across the galaxy. The most notable among them, Foryx, Barb and Falk, Berossus, were not simply warriors of skill. They were symbols of what it meant to bend war to one's will. The Warsmith was not a mirror of the Primarch, but an echo, cold, ruthless, efficient. And yet, no two were the same. Some ruled through fear, others through strategic brilliance. Some sought perfection in every engagement. Others believed in overwhelming brutality. What united them was purpose. Every warsmith understood his role not as glory seeker, but as executor. He was not the hand of fate. He was the fist of inevitability. In the wider imperium, the emergence of this title was met with confusion, even disdain. The Ultramarines, ever formal and orderly, saw it as irregular. The Imperial Fists, their rivals in stone and hammer, mocked the title as pretentious. But the results silenced the critics. Citadel after citadel fell. Campaigns thought unwinnable ended in calculated victory. And while the Iron Warriors never basked in parades or glory, the black and yellow of their hazard stripes became a harbinger of death for those behind fortress walls. Warsmiths became feared, not for their names, but for what followed them. Orbital batteries raining hell, breach drills cutting through rockcrete, vox feeds crackling with nothing but coordinates and detonation codes. A Warsmith's presence meant only one thing: surrender or be annihilated. There is a saying within the Legion, iron within, iron without. It is both a war cry and a creed. To be a warsmith was to embody that ethos, hardened in mind and body, unflinching in conviction, and utterly committed to the mission, no matter the cost. The iron within was the discipline to endure. The iron without was the force brought down upon the enemy. Though the rank would persist long after the heresy, even into the Long War and the Eye of Terror, its origin was rooted in necessity. Perturabo did not create warsmiths to flatter his sons. He created them because he needed commanders who could think like siege engines and act like executioners. In that crucible, under the ever-watchful eye of the Primarch, the first warsmiths were born, not from triumph, but from pressure. Just as iron is forged in fire, so too were the warsmiths shaped in war. They were not leaders in the conventional sense. They were the embodiment of the Legion's purpose. And from the first time a citadel fell under their coordinated might, the galaxy began to understand. Where a warsmith walks, stone shatters, and empires crumble. He was not the first Primarch discovered, nor the last to raise a legion. But when the Emperor found Perturabo on the world of Olympia, he uncovered a mind unlike any other. Not a warrior poet like Sanguinius, not a charismatic general like Horus. Perturabo was a builder of war and a breaker of worlds, cold, precise, unrelenting, and he saw everything. From the beginning, Perturabo viewed the galaxy not with wonder, but with disdain. He saw inefficiency in its civilizations, fragility in its cities, and arrogance in its rulers. To him, the stars were not to be admired. They were problems to be solved, defenses to be dismantled, errors to be corrected. By force, if necessary. Where others looked to the heavens and dreamed, Perturabo calculated firing arcs. This clarity, brutal as it was, became the cornerstone of his command. When he took control of the 4th Legion, he found it capable, disciplined, but directionless. They were warriors without a defining purpose. That changed the moment Perturabo imposed his will. He didn't give speeches. He didn't inspire loyalty with grand rhetoric or brotherhood. He gave orders, and he expected perfection. Under his command, the Iron Warriors were not molded. They were reforged, and like iron in the forge, they screamed as they were shaped. What made Perturabo different was his detachment. He did not care for glory. He did not believe in the myth of heroism. He valued only function. What worked, what did not. He stripped his legion of traditions that had taken root before his arrival. Rituals, abandoned, battle honors, archived. Names and banners meant nothing to Perturabo. Results were all that mattered, and those results would come through a single inescapable reality: siege warfare. Perturabo did not choose this path lightly. In the early years of his command, he observed. He watched as other legions stormed across the stars, claiming victories in open battle, earning songs and statues. The Lunar Wolves with their fast strikes, the Blood Angels with their blazing assaults, the Ultramarines with their tight formations. And then there was the Iron Warriors, sent into the most punishing wars, assigned the worst campaigns, deployed not for glory, but for endurance. No Primarch spoke openly of it, but the Emperor's pattern was clear. When a world refused to yield, when defenses stood tall and defiant, it was the 4th Legion who received the order. Not because they were the best, but because they could be relied upon to pay the blood price without complaint. Perturabo saw it all, and he never forgot, so he leaned into it. If the galaxy wanted to see his sons as executioners of sieges, then he would become the greatest siege master in history. He poured his intellect into the art of fortification and demolition. He studied ancient Terran texts, Da Vinci, Vauban, Haxo, and surpassed them all. His designs reshaped entire campaign doctrines. He built fortresses not to inspire awe, but to demoralize those who would face them. Labyrinthine bastions, bastards of concrete, ferrocrete, and ceramite. Every structure he raised was a weapon. This obsession filtered down into every aspect of the Legion. By Perturabo's decree, every Iron Warrior was trained not just to fight, but to think like an engineer. His officers memorized stress diagrams and artillery equations alongside their battlefield drills. Explosives were taught with the same reverence others gave to blade technique. If you couldn't bring down a curtain wall in 5 minutes or less, you were unfit for command. Perturabo's vision of war was not elegant, it was methodical. You do not outfight your enemy, you outlast him. You bury him under fire, undermine his confidence, collapse his bunkers, isolate his reinforcements. You make him watch as everything he built turns to rubble. Then, and only then, do you advance. To execute this vision, Perturabo restructured the Legion's chain of command. Traditional Astartes hierarchies relied on captains, company champions, honor guards. Perturabo found these sentimental and wasteful. Instead, he instituted a more pragmatic model. The Legion was reorganized into grand battalions, each equipped with the tools for autonomous siege warfare: artillery, armor, infantry, air support, and siege specialists. The commanders of these battalions were selected with clinical care, men of calculation and cruelty, capable of wielding war like an instrument. From this framework, the Warsmiths would later emerge. But the system itself, the structure, the doctrine, was Perturabo's design. His genius lay not in singular brilliance, but in operational depth. Each grand battalion operated as a machine, interlocked gears of death. Every cog had a purpose. Remove one and the others compensated. Perturabo had built redundancy into the Legion itself. What he could not build out was resentment. The Iron Warriors did not cheer their Primarch. They endured him. They feared his wrath and respected his intellect, but few loved him. Discipline was enforced through cruelty. Failure meant punishment. Not exile, not demotion, punishment. Perturabo was known to execute officers who displeased him, not for disobedience, but for failing to think 3 moves ahead. And yet, under his iron rule, the 4th Legion flourished in their own terrible way. They became the most effective siege force in the galaxy. They took worlds others couldn't. They held lines others abandoned. At Paramar, at the Helikas line, at the breakers of Urgale, the Iron Warriors dug in and bled the enemy dry. They didn't fight for admiration. They fought because it was the role carved out for them in the cold machinery of the Imperium. But Perturabo saw more. He did not just wish to win wars. He wanted to define how war would be fought for millennia to come. To that end, he constructed models. Endless models. He built a perfect replica of the Imperial Palace in his fortress on Olympia, studying its strengths and designing ways to dismantle them. Not because he planned to attack it, at least not yet, but because he believed in understanding the limits of defense. He even constructed simulation engines, vast cogitator networks capable of modeling planetary invasions. Through these, he refined his theories, tested doctrine, and taught his officers to think not like warriors, but like machines. Strategy, to Perturabo, was mathematics. Numbers did not lie, emotions did. But what made his vision dangerous was not his logic, it was his bitterness. Perturabo watched as the Emperor praised other sons. He noted every time Rogel Dorn was applauded for building defenses that he could have built better. He marked each campaign where his legion's success was ignored, while others were honored for lesser feats. In his eyes, the Iron Warriors were the foundation upon which the Imperium stood, but the Imperium refused to acknowledge them. So his vision began to curdle. At first, it was just brooding. Later, it became cruelty. Eventually, it festered into hatred, not only for the Emperor's negligence, but for his own kin. Perturabo believed they viewed him as a tool, not a brother. And in truth, many did. Even those who admired his genius struggled to understand his severity. Guilliman found him dour. Dorn found him cold. Fulgrim mocked him openly. This isolation fed Perturabo's darker impulses. His fortresses grew more elaborate, his discipline more extreme. By the time Horus extended the offer of rebellion, Perturabo's loyalty was already in doubt, and when the heresy erupted, he did not hesitate. He had given everything to the Imperium and received only ashes. But that is a tale for another chapter. This chapter belongs to Perturabo's vision, and the legion he forged in its image. A vision of war without glory, of victory through attrition, endurance, and devastation. A vision where sentiment has no place, and every structure, be it fortress or ideology, can and should be broken. The Warsmiths would carry that vision forward, but its architect, its Iron Father, would always be Perturabo, the builder of sieges, the breaker of trust, and the mind behind the Iron Warriors. You don't understand the Iron Warriors until you understand their obsession, not with battle, not with victory, but with method, with the exact science of destruction. To some, siegecraft is a tool, a means to achieve a strategic goal. A siege is what you do when an enemy has holed up and won't come out to die like they're supposed to. To most legions, it is slow, dull, and inelegant. It's what happens when the glory runs out. To the Iron Warriors, siege is everything. It is the beginning, the middle, and the end of all war. This was not always the case. In the earliest years of the Great Crusade, before Perturabo imposed his cold vision on the Fourth Legion, their approach to warfare was not so different from their cousins. They executed campaigns with standard Astartes doctrine, rapid strikes, shock assaults, compliance actions with decisive blows. But things changed, not by decree, by need. The Iron Warriors were assigned the unyielding, the entrenched, the fortified, worlds whose populations believed no one could reach them behind thick walls and continent-spanning bastions. And so the Iron Warriors adapted. They didn't just learn how to crack a fortress, they made it an art form. Over time, siegecraft became more than specialization. It became scripture. They learned how to approach a target not with raw firepower alone, but with ruthless logic. Every siege was a puzzle, every structure a problem to be solved. And within the Legion, this mindset was cultivated not by chance, but by indoctrination. From neophyte to warsmith, every Iron Warrior was drilled in the fundamentals of demolition, fortification, breach mechanics, and counter-battery warfare. And more than that, they were taught why it mattered. Siege is not a battle of the strong. It is a battle of the patient, the precise, the merciless. Consider a typical engagement. Most legions would surround a city, probe its defenses, then launch a multi-pronged assault backed by air support. The Iron Warriors, they start with mathematics. They calculate soil density beneath the walls. They chart ranges of every visible and concealed artillery piece. They create pressure simulations on buttresses. And then they begin to kill, slowly, relentlessly. First, the outer sensors, then the Vox repeaters, then water supply lines, then morale. And when they strike, it is not the climax of battle. It is simply the next step in the equation. The defenders don't even realize the siege has begun until it is already lost. The Legion codified this approach into a vast repository of siege doctrine compiled across countless campaigns. These weren't just field manuals, they were mathematical treatises. Entire volumes existed on wall stress dynamics, subterranean breach vectors, and the psychotropic effects of prolonged bombardment. Iron Warriors commanders memorized these volumes the way chaplains memorized litanies. But it wasn't just the knowledge, it was the attitude. Siegecraft instilled a cold patience in the Iron Warriors, a detachment from spectacle. Where other Astartes gloried in the charge, the Iron Warriors gloried in pressure, in attrition, in knowing that every hour the enemy held was another nail in their coffin. It wasn't about the explosion, it was about where you placed the charge, how deep, at what angle. Nothing was random, nothing improvised. In this they found not just strength, but identity. Their enemies feared them for it. There is a psychological toll to knowing your city has been surrounded, not by berserkers or madmen, but by minds colder than the stone of your ramparts. You know they're calculating every weakness. You know they don't care about your surrender or your defiance. They're going to take your fortress apart, whether you fight or not. And when the final push comes, it's not chaos, it's choreography. Ironclad formations move through breach points under the cover of suppressing fire. Heavy weapon teams anchor the perimeter, while Terminators roll forward like pistons. The enemy falls not in a blaze of glory, but in pieces, scattered across sectors already marked and measured on Iron Warrior data slates hours before the attack began. This doctrinal approach extended to defensive warfare as well. The Iron Warriors didn't just break walls, they built them. And they built them with the same brutal calculus they used to destroy. Perturabo himself demanded that every fortress be tested against hypothetical siege conditions, and those designs were updated constantly. Even as they advanced, Iron Warriors were expected to construct trenches, gun nests, choke points, a mobile fortress with teeth. The Legion's fortification models became so sophisticated that even other legions sought them out, grudgingly. Some of the earliest Imperial bastions on Mars, Calth, and Paramar bore the fingerprints of Iron Warrior engineering. During the Crusade, this gave them a rare legitimacy among their kin. No one liked the Iron Warriors, but many relied on them. And yet, this mastery came with a cost. The deeper they entrenched themselves in siege doctrine, the further they drifted from their humanity. Siegecraft is not a clean art. It demands sacrifices. Sometimes that means sending wave after wave of your own into kill zones to find weak points. Sometimes it means starving a civilian population for weeks to break the morale of their garrison. Sometimes it means sacrificing precision for total annihilation. For the Iron Warriors, these weren't moral dilemmas. They were decisions of utility, cost-benefit, no emotion. This bred a cruelty beneath the steel, not born of hatred, born of detachment. When you see every city as a structure to be undone, its people become obstacles. They are factored into casualty projections and nothing more. It is no accident that the Iron Warriors were later feared not just for their siegecraft, but for their inhumanity. Siege warfare also infected their culture. Their speech became clipped, functional. Their rituals were stripped of pageantry. Their iconography emphasized geometric patterns, hazard warnings, kill zones. Their armor bore no ornate trim, only hazard stripes and reinforced plating. Even their interactions with each other were marked by hierarchy and efficiency. There was no room for bonds outside of function. You either served the plan or you were expendable. And this mentality was drilled into them from the start. Iron Warrior recruits were not chosen for passion or fire. They were chosen for intellect, discipline, and stamina. Their training was less about martial prowess and more about engineering aptitude, spatial awareness, and unflinching obedience. A recruit who showed too much flair or spontaneity would be reassigned or removed. By the heresy, the Fourth Legion had become something more and less than a legion. They were a siege apparatus, a living siege engine powered by doctrine and driven by unrelenting logic. And that transformation was total. Even their war gear reflected this focus. They favored weapons suited for entrenchment and close-quarters breaches, Volkite chargers, autocannons, graviton guns. Their siege terminators carried cyclonic melta lances and thunderfire cannons. Tanks were rarely fast or sleek. They were mobile walls, vindicators, predators with siege loadouts, and land raiders bristling with breaching equipment. And perhaps most iconic of all were their artillery battalions. The Iron Warriors brought more artillery to the field than any other legion, not for display, but for effect. Basilisks, medusas, whirlwinds, all synchronized into a seamless web of firepower. Many worlds fell not to assault, but to endless shelling that left no structure standing and no soul untouched. Even after the shell stopped, the trauma remained. For those who survived an Iron Warrior's siege, it was never forgotten, not because of spectacle, but because of inevitability. You weren't defeated, you were dismantled. It's tempting to think of them as emotionless machines, but that misses the point. There was rage under the surface, a burning resentment at the thanklessness of their duty, a bitterness toward the imperium that used them and discarded them. That bitterness seeped into every shell they fired, every wall they shattered, and over time it changed them. But that rage was never allowed to interfere with doctrine. The Iron Warriors were never wild, never reckless. No matter how deep the hatred ran, they obeyed the math. They followed the formula. That was their strength, and ultimately it was also their curse. The walls they broke would come to symbolize more than just victories. They were monuments to a legion that sacrificed everything for results. And no matter how many walls fell, the gratitude never came. So they stopped waiting for it. They built their own way of war, a doctrine of attrition and annihilation, a science of siege. And in that doctrine, they found the only truth they ever needed. Nothing is unbreakable. No general wages war alone, not even one bred for it. Perturabo, for all his prodigious intellect and contempt for weakness, understood this with unwavering clarity. He did not trust easily. He did not delegate casually. But in the maelstrom of the Great Crusade and the mounting madness of the Horus heresy, even the Lord of Iron required instruments capable of interpreting his will without hesitation. Precision tools, not personalities, minds like gears meshing perfectly with his own. He found 3. They were not chosen for their loyalty, nor for charisma, nor even personal bond. They were chosen because they functioned as extensions of his will, cold, calculating, and completely immersed in the mechanisms of warfare. The galaxy would come to know them by a simple, ominous name: the Trident. 3 Warsmiths, 3 minds honed to the edge of purpose. When Perturabo called upon the Trident, he did not seek advice. He sought alignment. These were not advisors who dared counter his vision. They refined it, executed it, mirrored it. And if one day they failed to live up to his standards, well, iron that cracks is discarded. The Trident was not a formal council enshrined in doctrine or records. It was a practical construct evolved out of necessity. At the helm of a rapidly growing legion, faced with an imperium demanding ever greater sacrifices, Perturabo required lieutenants capable of acting autonomously on a strategic level. Wars on multiple fronts, sieges stretching across sectors. He could not oversee every detail. He needed lieutenants who could. And so the Trident formed, not all at once, but gradually. It changed over time, but for much of the heresy and the years preceding it, 3 names stood at the apex of Iron Warrior's command: Foryx, Harcourt, and Barban Falk. They were not equals, not to Perturabo, but to the rest of the Legion they were the steel pillars upon which the Iron Warriors rested. Each brought a different strength. Each bore a different flaw. Foryx was the most celebrated among them. The first captain of the 1st Grand Battalion, he was, by many measures, the closest thing the Legion had to a hero, though he would never have called himself that. Foryx exemplified discipline and operational mastery. His battle reports were models of clarity, his strategies devoid of unnecessary complexity. He could orchestrate multi-pronged assaults with terrifying fluidity, bringing together artillery, armor, and infantry with a clockmaker's touch. He also understood Perturabo better than any of the others. Where others second-guessed or hesitated, Foryx anticipated. He knew when to stay silent, when to speak, and when to execute a command to the letter, even if it meant breaking every other consideration. That quality earned him both the primarchs' respect and his suspicion. Perturabo did not like those who knew him too well. The second spoke more loudly, marched more boldly. Harcourt, the Warsmith of the 23rd Grand Battalion, was a warrior of Olympian blood and iron resolve. Where Foryx excelled at coordination and restraint, Harcourt was bold, reactive, and unyielding. He was known to drive his men hard and his enemies harder. A builder of siege weapons and a breaker of foes, Harcourt's presence on the battlefield was like a piston slamming down. Repetitive, punishing, relentless. It was Harcourt who demanded the unrelenting escalade of the Cadmean citadel on Hydra Cordatus. An assault that, while ultimately successful, cost the Iron Warriors dearly. Perturabo had not sanctioned the maneuver. It did not matter that Harcourt's men stood atop the ruins afterward. All that mattered was the cost. And Perturabo never forgot when the equation came out wrong. The 3rd prong of the Trident was Barban Falk, a name spoken in whispers even among his own brothers. Falk was brilliant, ruthless, and driven by something even darker than loyalty. His innovations in siege doctrine bordered on the profane, and his fascination with the warp would, in time, lead him down a path the others dared not follow. But in those years before his ascension, Falk was the Legion's secret weapon. He coordinated the Hydra Cordatus campaign, helped engineer the Redoubt system collapses in Segmentum Solar, and carved victories from the bones of unwinnable battles. Falk was not loved, not by his men, not by his peers. But Perturabo valued him because he delivered results, even if those results came at a spiritual cost. Together, these 3 formed the Trident, not a council of warlords, but a syndicate of siege architects. Their personalities could not have been more different, but each served the singular purpose of perpetuating the Legion's doctrine at a planetary scale. They did not command companies. They commanded continents. Perturabo would dispatch them to different war zones with only the barest instruction, trusting that they would interpret his designs without deviation. When they failed, they were reminded, sometimes violently, of the cost of falling short. Perturabo did not punish failure casually, he punished it to purify. In his mind, the Trident were not just leaders, they were prototypes. If even they faltered, what hope did the rest of the Legion have? It was a high standard, one not all of them could maintain. Harcourt, for all his strength and drive, eventually broke under its weight. His unauthorized assault on Hydra Caudatus cost too many lives, and Perturabo's retribution was not symbolic, it was personal. Before his own command, Harcourt was publicly stripped of rank and honors. In one brutal moment, he went from Triarch to foot soldier. And worse still, he was replaced by one of his own, a line warrior named Kroger. A blunt instrument, elevated because of his obedience, not his finesse. Harcourt's fall marked a turning point within the Trident. It exposed the truth at the heart of Perturabo's command philosophy: utility over loyalty. It didn't matter that Harcourt had bled for the Legion. It didn't matter that he'd served with distinction. The moment his methods deviated from Perturabo's design, he became expendable. And what of the others? Foryx endured. Longer than most, his adaptability and steadiness kept him close to the Primarch, though even he was not immune to growing weariness. By the time of the Siege of Terra, he had become a grim figure, less a commander than a ghost of the Legion's former ideals. His retreat from the walls of the Imperial Palace was orderly, methodical, but in his eyes there was nothing left of victory, only calculation and survival. Falk, meanwhile, had already begun to slip into something less human. He trafficked in things that had no place in a legion of iron and mortar. Demons whispered to him. Arcane engines obeyed his touch. Eventually, the warp gave him what Perturabo never could: ascension. Barban Falk would become the Warsmith, shedding his flesh and becoming a demon prince. But before that transformation, while still mortal, he was the most dangerous of the Trident, because his ambitions extended beyond the physical. Some say the Trident fractured because of Perturabo's pressure. Others say it was inevitable, that three minds so different could not sustain alignment for long. But the truth is simpler. The Trident worked because Perturabo made it work. It broke when he no longer cared to maintain it. As the heresy deepened and trust unraveled across the traitor legions, Perturabo grew ever more isolated. He withdrew into grand designs, dark engines, and dreams of apocalyptic fortresses. The Trident, once his sharpest weapon, became obsolete. Its members died, turned, or fell from favor. By the time the Iron Cage was constructed, Perturabo no longer relied on lieutenants. He relied on machines. But in their time, the Trident was the closest thing the Iron Warriors ever had to a soul, if such a thing could survive in the crucible of cold strategy and endless sieges. They were not heroes. They were not brothers. They were functions, variables in a vast equation of war. And for a while they worked. That perhaps was the highest praise Perturabo ever gave anyone. In a legion where loyalty was measured in precision and worth, weighed in tonnage of rubble, Foryx stood apart. Not because he was different, but because he embodied everything the Iron Warriors were meant to be. Cold, reliable, implacable. Where others in the Trident sparked controversy, fell from grace, or pursued darker ambitions, Foryx remained steady. He wasn't beloved. No one in the Iron Warriors truly was. But among the endless ranks of steel-faced Astartes, his name carried weight. Not because it roared from his own throat, but because when it was spoken, things happened. Fortresses fell, cities crumbled, orders were obeyed. To understand Forex, you must understand function. He was not a visionary. He did not seek demonhood. He did not rebel against his primarch or crave personal power. Forex served, efficiently, completely, without hesitation, without failure. That was why Perturabo kept him close. Forex was the first captain of the 1st Grand Battalion, first in designation and, more often than not, first into the breach. He had risen through the ranks long before the title Warsmith even existed. When Perturabo reshaped the Legion's command structure and elevated certain captains to the new rank, Forex's name needed no debate. He was already there. In many ways, Forex was the prototype. Unlike some of his brothers, Forex was not born of the soil of Olympia. He hailed from Terra itself, a product of the earliest gene batches. But if anyone thought that made him less loyal to Perturabo, they never said it aloud. He was among the first to stand by the Primarch after the discovery, and among the last to leave his side, even as the heresy turned brother against brother. But loyalty alone is never enough. What made Forex invaluable was his mind. He possessed a rare kind of intelligence, not theoretical brilliance like Perturabo, not devious cunning like Falk. Forex had operational clarity, an instinct for momentum, timing, and deployment that made him a natural organizer of mass assaults. His gift was not invention, it was implementation. He took complex plans and made them real, one movement at a time. In a legion that worshipped planning and loathed improvisation, Forex was the one you sent when the plan had to become fact. He commanded respect from his peers, but not love. That suited him fine. The Iron Warriors were not a legion of camaraderie. They were soldiers, and Forex was their supreme example. He neither punished unnecessarily nor rewarded sentiment. He didn't rage. He didn't lecture. He simply acted. And when he acted, entire cities vanished. Take, for example, the campaign on Delgas II, a planet fortified with layers of concentric bastion cities built into cliffside terraces. Its defenders believed themselves untouchable, shielded by topography and decades of careful preparation. Forex studied the terrain, reviewed old tectonic charts, and launched a subterranean drilling operation under the lowest tier. When the upper cities felt the first rumble, it was already too late. Delgas II collapsed into itself, population, military garrison, and infrastructure swallowed in a matter of hours. There were no speeches afterward, no declarations of victory, just coordinates for the next target. Forex was never careless, but neither was he sentimental. During the Baratan rebellions, when elements of the 4th Legion became bogged down in a siege that stretched into months, morale began to degrade. Forex arrived, reviewed the situation, and determined that 2 entire cohorts had become liabilities. He redeployed them to exposed flanks with minimal support, not as punishment, but as misdirection. The enemy repositioned to counter the apparent weakness, walking directly into a triangulated artillery trap that ended the war in a single night. The sacrificed Iron Warriors did not complain. They knew what they were: tools, instruments of will. Forex understood that better than anyone, but perhaps the most famous operation he ever commanded was the Battle of Fall, a rare fleet engagement, and an even rarer example of Iron Warriors' tactical dominance in space. There, Forex squared off against the Imperial Fists, led by the dour and disciplined Alexis Pollux. The battle was never meant to be a straightforward confrontation. It was a calculated ambush, orchestrated under Perturabo's broader war plan, intended to cripple the Imperial Fist's fleet movements and bait them into a protracted war of attrition. Forex executed the ambush with textbook precision, coordinating overlapping firing arcs, false retreats, and overlapping fields of gravitic disruption to isolate enemy vessels. And yet, despite overwhelming firepower and advantage, the Imperial fists escaped. Pollux, through sheer stubbornness and sacrifice, pulled the remains of his fleet out of the trap. Forix had achieved a strategic victory, but a hollow one. The primary objective, total annihilation, was denied. He said nothing. No post-battle analysis, no excuse. He filed the report, adjusted the doctrine, and moved on. For Forix, every failure was data. Every victory was another iteration in the long, grinding perfection of siege warfare. When the heresy broke open and the Iron Warriors formally declared for Horus, Forix did not waver. There was no turmoil in his heart. If Perturabo gave the order, it was correct. That was enough. At East Van 5, he led his Grand Battalion in the extermination of the Loyalist legions trapped in the drop site massacre. His formations moved with mechanical efficiency, hammering the remains of the Raven Guard, Salamanders, and Iron Hands into the ash. There was no glory in it, just work. Bloody, necessary work. During the Siege of Terra, Forix remained a central figure in the assault. It was his men who breached several outer redoubts, pushing deeper into the Imperial Palace's layered defenses than any other formation under Perturabo's command. And when word came of Horus's fall and the order was given to retreat, Forix did not argue. He orchestrated a withdrawal under fire with such composure that even enemy commanders later admitted grudging admiration. What happened after is harder to pin down. Following the retreat from Terra and the scouring of the traitor legions from the Imperium's heart, the Iron Warriors fell back to their new home, Medrengard, a fortress world in the eye of terror. There, among the black mountains and choking ash skies, the Warsmiths ruled their domains in uneasy alliance and growing rivalry. Forix returned to his post. But something had changed. He had given everything: discipline, loyalty, countless victories. And still the Iron Warriors were exiles, their names spoken in hatred and fear. The Long War, as it came to be called, offered no clarity. Only endless campaigns, ceaseless attrition, and the howling madness of the warp gnawing at the edges of sanity. Forix endured. He always endured. But the fire behind his eyes dulled. The man who had once measured war in results now measured it in repetition. When the Iron Warriors launched the siege of Hydra Caudatus late in 4041, Forix took part, leading his Grand Battalion in what should have been a textbook operation. But this time, the Imperium had prepared well. Its defenders unleashed a counterattack with Titan support, including Warhound and Reaver-class god machines. Forix, ever at the front, ever coordinating the breach, was caught in open terrain as the Warhound-class Titan Merciless locked onto his signal. In a flash of sun-bright annihilation, Forix was atomized. No speech. No final stand, just fire and silence. The death of Forix sent shockwaves through the Iron Warriors' ranks. He had been with the Legion since the beginning. He had been their fixed point in a universe unraveling. Now, he was gone. There was no ceremony, no eulogy. His name was entered in the annals of the 1st Grand Battalion. His protocols and battlefield calculations were retained for future use. But the soul behind them, if such a thing still existed in a warsmith, was no more. In the cold halls of Karlan Gol and the siege forges of Medrengard, they still speak his name. Not in mourning, in measurement. This angle Forix would have corrected. That bombardment schedule Forix would have shortened. This breach Forix would have made wider. He remains not as memory, but as a standard, an algorithm, a question whispered across Vox links in times of uncertainty. What would Forix do? Among the Iron Warriors, honor was never worn on the chest. It was buried in duty, silence, and scars. To lead was to suffer, and to survive, command meant enduring not only the war without, but the gaze of Perturabo himself. Warsmith Berossus knew this truth all too well. There was a time when Berossus stood as a paragon of the Iron Warrior's unrelenting purpose. A towering figure clad in Terminator plate, lined with siege glyphs, master of the 2nd Grand Battalion, he was known across the Great Crusade for his brutal efficiency. When worlds needed cracking, when enemy strongholds had to be reduced to lifeless ruins, Berossus was summoned. His name was synonymous with inevitability. A siege was over the moment he arrived. But in a legion where success brought no praise and failure earned a death sentence, glory was a fleeting illusion. For Berossus, it would become a curse. He was not a subtle commander. Berossus favored frontal assaults, supported by overwhelming firepower. His methods lacked the surgical elegance of Foryx or the innovation of Falk. Yet what they lacked in finesse, they made up for in brutality. His Grand Battalion was nicknamed the Iron Flood, a reference to the way his forces advanced, like liquid metal, slow but unstoppable, consuming everything in their path. Berossus made his reputation in sieges that others deemed unwinnable. During the conquest of Dromus, his forces waged a 49-day bombardment campaign against a subterranean fortress city built into the crust of a volcanic moon. Imperial commanders had marked the citadel as untouchable. Berossus disagreed. He ordered tectonic destabilizers deployed around the city's magma chambers, tools most commanders considered too dangerous to use at scale. As the siege progressed, the earth began to quake and buckle, the heat rising to unbearable levels. When the final assault was launched, enemy defenders were not only half-mad from shell shock, but dying of heat stroke and asphyxiation. Berossus led the charge himself, his armor glowing red from exposure. By the time the fortress fell, the structure had sunk halfway into molten rock. This was Berossus in his prime, a hammer where others used scalpels, the kind of commander who would burn down a city just to make its defenders sweat before the killing began. But the heresy changed everything. When the call came to turn traitor, Berossus did not hesitate. Loyalty to the Emperor had always been transactional in his mind, conditional upon respect, acknowledgement, purpose. None of those things had been given. Perturabo's word was absolute. If Horus would bring the galaxy to heel, then so be it. During the early stages of the heresy, Berossus proved himself again and again. At the Pyranthine salient, he executed a rare three-pronged siege across volcanic terrain, synchronizing artillery batteries and drop-pod assaults in a maneuver that crushed loyalist resistance before reinforcements could react. At Ivix Station, he led an orbital strike on the last communications hub of the Ist sector, rendering the Imperial defenders mute before ground operations had even begun. Yet for all his success, Berossus lacked the intangible quality Perturabo valued most: adaptability. He could win wars, but not without bleeding. His methods were predictable. And worse, he began to believe that his seniority insulated him from scrutiny. He was wrong. The breaking point came on Ramos Delta, a fortress world defended by Imperial army regiments and elements of the Iron Hands. Berossus, eager to secure the planet quickly, launched a nighttime escalade, ignoring Perturabo's specific instruction to wait for synchronized orbital bombardment. The assault succeeded, but at significant cost. Hundreds of Iron Warriors were lost, siege tanks destroyed, resources wasted. Perturabo was not impressed by the results. He only saw the deviation. Berossus was summoned to answer for his decision. In a legion where failure was dissected like a diseased organ, few escapes went unpunished. But Berossus believed his record would shield him. He had served longer than most. He had never once shirked duty. He was not prepared for what happened next. There was no trial, no counsel. Perturabo stood before him and passed sentence for disobedience, for wasting lives, for presumption. The punishment was not execution. It was eternity. Berossus was bound within a contemptor pattern dreadnought, his body destroyed, his mind locked in a prison of steel. But unlike honored veterans who received such internment with reverence, Berossus' sarcophagus was left unfinished, his pain inhibitors disabled, his nerve feeds kept active at full sensitivity. He would feel everything, forever, a punishment measured in moments, each one an echo of his failure. They called him the Bound Iron from that day forward. Still a warsmith, still commanding, but now a walking symbol of Perturabo's intolerance for error. Where once his voice carried strength and presence, now it rattled through vox grills, distorted and hollow. His footsteps thundered not with authority, but with humiliation. And yet Berossus endured. That was his nature. He turned the pain inward, converted it into rage. And from that rage came purpose. His mind remained intact, his tactical acumen undiminished. And in time, his bitterness became weaponized. Millennia passed. The heresy became history. The long war dragged on. The Iron Warriors fractured into warbands and rivalries. On Medrengard, the demon world fortress gifted to Perturabo by the Dark Gods, Berossus retained command of his own grand company. His dreadnought body was rearmed with plasma blasters and siege drills the size of tank turrets. His forge chambers churned out shells and war engines. He did not forget what was taken from him. When Warsmith Honso returned from the Hydra Cordatus raid, bearing a stolen cache of Imperial Fist's gene seed, Berossus watched closely. A pact had been made. The spoils were to be shared. Honso broke that pact. He kept the gene seed for himself. Berossus, bound in metal but not in fear, declared war. He allied with Toramino, another veteran warsmith, and together they laid siege to Kalengol, Honso's citadel on Medrengard. Berossus deployed everything he had: siege rams, corrupted artillery, even the forge beasts, walking engines forged in demon furnaces. It was a war between brothers, fueled by spite and greed, but beneath it all was a deeper fury. Berossus was no longer fighting for spoils, he was fighting to be remembered. The siege lasted weeks, walls fell, Honso's numbers dwindled. Eventually, Berossus breached the inner sanctum. There, within the heart of Kalengol, he met Honso face to face, if such a term still applied. The fight was brutal. Berossus fought with the desperation of a man long past mercy. His siege drill carved through ceramite, his plasma incinerated whole squads. In close quarters, his frame was too large, too powerful. He had Honso pinned, impaled on a serrated drill arm, servo claws clamped tight. But Honso had prepared. From the shadows, his demon engine bodyguard, a creature of the warp named Onyx, lunged. In a burst of warp-born fury, it tore open Berossus's armored carapace. Honso, wounded but alive, climbed atop the ruined dreadnought and did what Perturabo never allowed. He made it personal. He reached into the breach, tore out the mind impulse unit, and with it, the last remnants of the warsmith who once commanded entire worlds. Berossus died as he had lived, without mercy, without sentiment, without forgiveness. And in the end, there were no monuments, no memory but dust. His grand company splintered. His name was etched in no halls, but in the whispers of siege casters and dreadnought sarcophagi. Some still speak of Berossus the Bound, who defied gods and brothers alike, and who, despite everything, never once bowed. Loyalty is a strange word in the grim history of the Iron Warriors. It rarely meant what it did to others. Loyalty to the Imperium, it was rarely returned. Loyalty to a cause, causes were buried under fortresses. To Perturabo, that was survival. But one name in the annals of the Fourth Legion stands alone, a contradiction in iron and defiance. a warsmith who betrayed his traitor brothers by remaining true to an oath that had already betrayed him. His name was Barabbas Dantioch, and his legacy is spoken in hushed tones, even among the most stalwart loyalists. Dantioch was no upstart. He rose through the ranks the hard way, by enduring. While others chased prestige through devastation, Dantioch built. He understood the foundation of war was not fire, but stone. Fortifications, logistics, bastions of last resort. His mind gravitated toward creation even as his legion became synonymous with obliteration. His skill was undeniable. During the Great Crusade, he was entrusted with the 51st Expeditionary Fleet and soon became known for constructing fast, brutal campaign networks, garrisoned supply lines, modular trench systems, automated defense grids. On battlefield after battlefield, he left behind monuments to control. Where others saw terrain, Dantioch saw architecture. War was not just fought, it was designed. Even Perturabo acknowledged him, which in the Iron Warriors was as close as a father ever came to approval. He was granted full authority to build and command the citadel of Schadenhold on Lesser Damantine, a strategically insignificant world with deep mineral wealth and a suspiciously stable warp signature. Dantioch transformed it into a masterpiece of subterranean defense, as if expecting a war that hadn't yet been announced. But fate has no mercy for those who prepare too well. On the world of Golgis, during an engagement with the Xenos Hrud, Dantioch encountered a temporal weapon unlike anything seen before. The Hrud, an ancient race with barely understood reality-warping powers, unleashed a time dilation field that washed over Dantioch and his strike force. Most of his warriors died screaming. Dantioch lived, but paid a price far worse. He emerged aged, ravaged, his once proud form slowed and bent, his face distorted by the passing of centuries in moments. Yet his mind remained intact, sharper, perhaps, tempered by suffering. He forged a faceplate of raw iron and drove it into his own skull, welding it in place while the metal was still hot. A mask not to hide his wounds, but to become them. From that day forward, he wore no helmet. His face was a symbol. Pain endured and reshaped into purpose. Reduced in stature but not rank, Dantioch returned to Lesser Damantine. There he buried himself in the defense of Schadenhold, refining its geometry, ensuring every corridor, every bulkhead, every turret bore the weight of his vigilance. He was preparing for something he couldn't name, but he knew it was coming. And it did. When the Horus heresy shattered the Imperium, when legions fell to madness and primarchs to treason, the truth reached Lesser Damantine not as a shout, but a whisper. Reports trickled in. Brother killing brother, Terra in flames, Horus declared War Master turned renegade, and worse, the Iron Warriors had joined him. The message came not from rumor, but from command. Warsmith Idris Krendel, bearer of the new Legion Order, arrived at Schadenhold with sealed instructions from Perturabo himself. Lesser Damantine was to be fortified as a staging point for traitor forces. The Iron Warriors would soon occupy it en masse. The War Master demanded compliance. Dantioch listened. Then he made a decision no Iron Warrior had made before. He said no. It wasn't a moment of fury or principle. It was calculation. His oath to the Emperor had never been about loyalty to an ideal. It had been a contract. But Perturabo had broken it. The Legion had abandoned everything it was meant to defend, and Dantioch would not become what they had chosen to be. He ordered the gates sealed. Krendel was furious. He demanded obedience, invoking Perturabo's name and the bonds of Legion brotherhood. Dantioch countered with the weight of the fortress itself. He knew every firing solution, every choke point. If Krendel wanted Lesser Damantine, he'd have to bleed for it. And bleed he did. The siege began with orbital bombardment. Dantioch activated void shields layered beneath the planet's crust, deflecting the worst of the fire. Then came the drop assaults. Every corridor was a death trap, every room a killing floor. Krendel threw more and more iron warriors into the grinder, but Dantioch anticipated every angle. The siege lasted 366 days, a full year of attrition. Dantioch commanded from a central chamber, his voice echoing through static-choked Vox channels. Food supplies ran low, air recyclers faltered. His defenders, a motley mix of loyalist iron warriors, Imperial Army stragglers, and civilian workers, fought with savage desperation. But eventually, even he could not defy gravity. Krendel deployed an Imperator-class Titan, one of the largest god machines ever built. Its guns broke open the vault doors of the Schadenhold and crushed half the mountain range beneath molten shells. The walls cracked. The bastion fell. Still, Dantioch would not give Krendel the satisfaction of victory. As the traitors flooded in, Dantioch initiated a last-ditch plan. He and his surviving forces teleported, not away, but onto Krendel's flagship. A final insult. From the burning fortress, they emerged within the enemy's command deck. A brief, savage firefight ensued. Dantioch planted charges in the engine room and escaped the detonation by seconds. Krendel survived, but his fleet was crippled, his pride shattered. Dantioch vanished into the void, a rogue element, a loyalist iron warrior, now hunted by both sides. He eventually re-emerged in the unlikeliest of places, Sotha, home of the Pharaohs, a mysterious alien beacon of unimaginable power. There he encountered the Ultramarines, and after a brief standoff, parleyed with Roboute Guilliman himself. What followed was a collaboration none could have predicted. Guilliman, desperate to maintain contact across fragmented Imperial space, recognized Dantioch's expertise. The Pharos, while powerful, was unstable, its energies threatening to tear reality apart. Dantioch, with his engineer's mind and architect's touch, became its guardian. The Iron Warrior built walls not to keep the enemy out, but to hold the galaxy together. He served in silence, he worked in solitude, but always he endured. No one knows precisely when he died. Some say he was killed during a Pharos malfunction. Others whisper he walked into the warp, defiant even in death. Guilliman himself ordered that his name be honored, quietly, without ceremony. A simple engraving deep beneath Sotha's crust reads, Barabbas Dantioch, iron within, true without. The Imperium would never fully trust his story. The Iron Warriors would never forgive it. He belonged to neither world, but in the ruins of a galaxy burning with betrayal, one Warsmith chose to hold the line. Not for glory, not for thanks, but because it was right. Among the Warsmiths, there were many who fell, but only one had the misfortune of falling not to blade, bolt, or bombardment, but to the one man who judged more harshly than any enemy commander, Perturabo. Warsmith Harcourt was a veteran of Olympia, one of the old blood. Tempered in the earliest campaigns, forged in the Primarch's shadow, he rose quickly in the ranks, not by charm or diplomacy. Those were alien concepts in the Iron Warriors, but through an unwavering sense of discipline and a devotion to structure. Harcourt understood siege warfare the way a mason understands his trowel. His battalions moved like gears, his artillery was timed to the second, and his reputation across the 4th Legion was one of grim excellence. But perfection in the Iron Warriors was an illusion. There was always one more step to take, one more layer of stone to tear down. And there was always someone watching, measuring, waiting for the flaw. Harcourt commanded the 23rd Grand Battalion, one of the largest in the Legion, its ranks bolstered by Terran veterans and Olympian loyalists alike. At the height of the Great Crusade, he sat on Perturabo's inner council, the infamous Trident, and was viewed even by his peers as a rising force within the Legion. His fortress designs were employed across several campaigns. His predictive bombardment models were studied by junior Warsmiths as doctrine. But Harcourt, for all his skill, had one flaw: pride. A dangerous thing in a legion where pride was indistinguishable from weakness. It was during the lead-up to the heresy that the seeds of his ruin were sown. The Iron Warriors had turned from the Imperium, their loyalty shifted to Horus, and their eyes fixed on new conquests. One of those targets was Hydra Caudatus, a heavily defended world in Segmentum Obscurus, home to an Adeptus Mechanicus data vault and an Imperial Fists garrison. Perturabo's plan was simple and meticulous: encircle the citadel, neutralize its orbital support, and reduce the fortress slowly using heavy siege artillery and calculated escalations. It was to be a lesson, not just a victory. But Harcourt grew restless. His battalion had been relegated to the periphery. Observation, containment, logistical coordination, essential duties, but far from glorious. Harcourt, ever the perfectionist, saw opportunity in the apparent stagnation of the siege. The walls of the Cadmean citadel, though formidable, were not insurmountable. Its defenders, though stubborn, were finite. Harcourt believed he could end the campaign early and present Perturabo with a gift: a broken fortress and a completed objective. He committed his forces to a full frontal escalade, bypassing several siege protocol stages. The 23rd Grand Battalion, supported by heavy breacher squads and a company of Terminators, stormed the walls under the cover of pre-dawn bombardment. The attack was brutal, coordinated, but ultimately premature. The defenders of the Cadmean citadel were more prepared than Harcourt had estimated. Their defenses were not static. Their fields of fire had been adapted. The Iron Warriors were funneled into kill zones, their advance slowed by prepared kill labyrinths and booby-trapped corridors. Within hours, the breach became a bloodbath. Of the 5 companies committed to the attack, only one emerged intact. Harcourt's forces were repelled, barely clinging to the edge of the citadel wall. Among the survivors was a junior officer, Kroger, a brute of a warrior known more for obedience than brilliance. He had dragged his battered squad through the breach, slaughtering defenders in melee and carving out a temporary foothold with raw aggression. Perturabo was not amused. The Primarch did not see boldness. He saw deviation. A calculated plan had been discarded. Iron Warriors' lives, his resources, had been spent without approval. And for what? An inconclusive gain, purchased with blood and failure. The reprimand came swiftly. Before the assembled legion, in the shadow of siege engines and craters, Harcourt was stripped of his rank. His warplate was removed piece by piece in silence. His honors erased, his heraldry burned, not killed, not exiled. Worse, demoted. Harcourt was reassigned to the very battalion he once commanded, not as an officer but as a line trooper, and in his place Kroger was named Warsmith of the 23rd. The decision sent shockwaves through the Legion. Kroger was no tactician. He had no legacy of command. He was a soldier's soldier, brutal, loud, and utterly without subtlety. But that, perhaps, was the point. Perturabo had no patience left for subtlety. Under Kroger's command, the 23rd became a blunt instrument. Precision gave way to overwhelming force. Where Harcourt had drawn elegant plans, Kroger simply overwhelmed. He was not a thinker, but he knew how to apply pressure. He trusted his gut, and when his gut told him to kill something, he did so with fervor. He embraced his new position with terrifying enthusiasm. Kruger's first act as Warsmith was to resume the assault on Hydra Caudatus, but with a different strategy: total saturation. He requisitioned every available artillery piece and initiated a planetary bombardment that lasted 24 hours without pause. He then deployed siege towers, frontal assault units, and demon engines in a synchronized advance that crushed the defenders through sheer mass. It worked. The Cadmean citadel fell. Kroger didn't take the throne room with surgical strikes. He buried it under rubble. The Iron Warriors flooded the lower levels, executed the remaining defenders, and secured the Adeptus Mechanicus vaults. Victory at last. Perturabo said little. The victory had come at cost, but it had come. Kroger had proven himself, if only by showing that sometimes brute force was all that was needed. And Harcourt? He remained within the 23rd, forced to follow the orders of the man who had replaced him. A lifetime of discipline and service reduced to silence and obedience. But Harcourt, even in disgrace, retained his mind. He was not a fool. He saw that Kroger's methods were effective but unsustainable, and so he adapted. He became Kroger's advisor, his quiet shadow. He offered insights, suggestions. The two forged an uneasy alliance. Kroger, for all his violence, lacked strategic depth. Harcourt filled in the gaps. Together, they became something neither could have been alone, a force of destruction guided by cold intellect. For a time, it worked. Campaigns were won, fortresses shattered. Harcourt began to believe he might reclaim something of what was lost, but such peace never lasts in the eye of terror. As the centuries wore on, Kroger's personality grew more erratic. The warp gnawed at him. He began to distrust everyone. He suspected plots in every silence, and eventually he turned on the one man who had always stood beside him. During the siege of Deshekra, a failed attempt to reclaim a former Mechanicum Forge world, Kroger accused Harcourt of sabotage. He claimed that his former commander had intentionally allowed enemy gunships to escape, that he had given false coordinates, that he had conspired to reclaim the 23rd through treachery. The truth? There was no evidence. But evidence didn't matter. In a fit of rage, Kroger struck Harcourt down, personally and without ceremony. Harcourt died not on the walls of a fortress or before the guns of the Imperium, but on the deck of a warship, killed by the warrior who had once been his protégé. His body was dumped into the void. No rights, no honor. The irony was bitter. Harcourt had lived and breathed the Iron Warrior's ethos, discipline, control, obedience. He had given his life to the Legion, only to be undone by the very culture he helped create. His fall and Kroger's rise remain one of the most telling parables in Iron Warrior's history. Not because they reveal treachery, but because they reveal truth. In a Legion where value is measured by output, where one mistake erases a lifetime of success, the machine always consumes its makers. There is no room for past service, no room for redemption, only the next wall, the next siege, the next Warsmith. And when they fall, as they always do, the gears keep turning. Barbenfalk was never just another Warsmith. Even before his name was spoken in dread tones across the Eye of Terror, even before he clawed his way into demonhood and abandoned his flesh for eternal war, Barbenfalk existed apart from his peers. He wasn't louder or crueler or more ambitious than the others, though he was all of those things in time. No, what made Falk different was his vision. Most Iron Warriors fought to break the walls of others. Falk wanted to break the rules of war itself. In the closing decades of the Great Crusade, Falk held command of the 126th Grand Battalion, a relatively small but heavily mechanized siege force known for deploying forbidden tech salvaged from long-dead Xenos empires. That alone made Falk suspect in many eyes. While Perturabo himself respected utility above all, even he recognized the thin line between effectiveness and heresy. Falk danced on that line, barefoot, eyes open, and yet his results were undeniable. Where traditional sieges could take weeks or months, Falk found shortcuts: crater induction charges, gravimetric destabilizers, neurofracture fields, each an abomination by mechanicum standards, but devastatingly effective in practice. The 126th began to earn a reputation as the Ghost Makers, named not for their silence, but for the absence they left behind. Their sieges did not end with surrender. They ended with cities gone, wiped from maps, cultures erased, histories unmade. Falk didn't crave attention. He despised ceremony and loathed personal display. His armor bore no heraldry. His personal seal was simply 3 intersecting triangles etched into his vambrace, a symbol that meant nothing or everything, depending on who you asked. He spoke rarely. When he did, his voice came slow and mechanical, as though his words were passing through a machine first. Some said he had already begun the process of replacing his organic vocal cords with synthetic ones. But what he lacked in charm, he made up for in command presence. Falk saw war as an act of precision entropy, controlled collapse. A fortress was not an obstacle. It was a sequence of events waiting to be triggered in the right order. To him, walls didn't fall. They were released. By the time the Horus Heresy began, Falk had already aligned himself with the deeper truth. Loyalty to Perturabo was absolute, but it was transactional. Falk didn't follow the War Master out of personal allegiance. He followed because Horus offered something Perturabo never did: access. Access to weapons forbidden by Mars, to demons masquerading as gods, to knowledge buried beneath layers of imperial denial. Falk saw the heresy not as rebellion, but as opportunity. It was during the infamous Angel Exterminatus campaign that Falk truly began his metamorphosis. Alongside Perturabo and a coalition of Iron Warriors and Emperor's children, Falk journeyed into the Maelstrom, toward a forgotten Eldar crone world, a haunted, warp-echoed grave of an ancient race, known in whispers as Sham. The objective was hidden even from many of Perturabo's inner circle. Publicly, it was said that the Iron Warriors sought an ancient Xenos superweapon buried within the ruined city of Amun-Nai-Shak Kalis. But Falk knew better. He had seen the signs, heard the scratching at the edge of consciousness. Something slept beneath Sham's ashen crust, something older than chaos, yet inextricably tied to it. The expedition became a descent into madness. The Iron Warriors, normally impervious to the metaphysical, began to change. Armor plates warped subtly, machine spirits screamed in silence. Some warriors reported their own weapons whispering to them during battle. Falk, meanwhile, thrived. He walked deeper into the ruins than any other. Alone, unafraid. In the temple chambers of the Crone world, beneath inverted pyramids of crystal and rusted bone, he found it, not a weapon, but a presence. A consciousness wrapped in architecture, a being of logic and madness bound within the city itself. It offered no name. It asked no questions. It simply gave. When Falk returned to his battalion, he was changed. His armor no longer shone with ceramite, but rippled with oily reflections. His voice had become a layered, harmonic distortion. More importantly, he knew things. New siege paradigms, time-warping calculations, ways to harness warp energies into matter-breaking pulses. Perturabo took note. He didn't approve, but he didn't interfere. Falk began integrating what he had learned. The 126th Battalion became a different beast entirely. Traditional ordnance was supplemented with demon-fused artillery, capable of firing shells that phased through void shields or reversed gravitational mass mid-flight. Falk's Warsmiths developed implosive torpedoes that collapsed buildings in on themselves, pulling stone and bone into impossible geometries. Other Warsmiths began to whisper. Some accused him of heresy, others of genius. He ignored them all. When the call came to assault Hydra Caudatus in the 41st millennium, 10,000 years into the Long War, Falk emerged from whatever fortress he had entombed himself within, dragging with him the remnants of the 126th, now fused into a demon-forged cadre whose rites of war could barely be translated into words. The world was an Adeptus Mechanicus redoubt. Beneath its citadel, hidden behind sealed vaults and gene-locked doors, lay a prize greater than weapons or relics, imperial fists, gene seed, harvested in secret, stored in massive cryo-capsules. To Falk it was destiny. He commanded the siege not like a general, but like a conductor. The Iron Warriors didn't advance in lines, they poured like mercury. Every shell was preordained, every incursion predicted. The defenders held for weeks, but it was inevitable. No structure could resist what Falk had become. When the walls fell and the vaults cracked open, the final gift was his. Thousands of canisters containing the essence of Dorn's bloodline, the gene seed of the hated foe. And as the fortress crumbled, as the defenders screamed beneath the weight of war machines, Barban Falk ascended. It did not happen with fanfare. There was no ritual, no summoning. The warp simply accepted him. One moment he stood among the ruins, the next he was becoming, his armor dissolving into warp metal, his form stretching and contorting, no longer bound by symmetry or anatomy. Wings of spined iron unfurled from his back, his face split into layered plates of ceramite and flame. A voice, his and not his, rose above the battlefield and the sky answered. Barban Falk was now Diamond Prince of Chaos, undivided. But before he left the material realm, before his essence became fully unbound, he did one last thing. He turned to his lieutenants, his junior officers, and from among them, he chose one. Honso, a warrior of mixed heritage, Iron Warrior's blood tainted by Imperial Fist gene seed. Honso had proven himself during the siege. Falk, perhaps seeing a twisted poetry in the contradiction, named him Heir. "You will carry the fire," he said, "and you will burn our enemies from within." Then Falk vanished, drawn into the warp, claimed by powers whose names he had never spoken aloud. The Iron Warriors detonated the remaining structures of Hydra Caudatus and left nothing behind but glassed earth and echoes. Today, Falk is more myth than reality. He no longer walks among mortals, but his influence echoes through the oblivion forges of Medrengard. His name is invoked by Chaos Warsmiths seeking favor. His tactics are studied, feared, and misunderstood. Some claim his demon form watches over the Iron Warriors' fragmented warbands, whispering strategies through data feeds and corrupted logic engines. Others believe he is preparing a second siege, one not of fortresses, but of reality itself. Whatever the truth, one thing is certain. Barban Falk did not just break walls. He broke the boundaries. Between man and god, between machine and demon, between siegecraft and sorcery, and in doing so he became not a warsmith, but the Warsmith. There are sieges, and then there is Hydra Caudatus. Even in the long scorched memory of the 41st millennium, where every planet has tasted war and every fortress has been tested by fire, Hydra Caudatus stands apart, not for the size of the armies involved, nor for the weaponry deployed, but for what was buried beneath it. Hydra Caudatus was a vault, a fortress world, a redoubt built not to dominate a system, but to guard a secret. To the Imperium, it was just another Adeptus Mechanicus data world, of tactical importance, yes, but not one that stood out. Its location was deliberately unremarkable. Its orbit was quiet, its garrison competent but not exceptional. But beneath its surface, deep in reinforced, adamantium-sealed vaults, was a hidden prize, the genetic legacy of the Imperial Fists. The Mechanicus, in quiet collusion with the Inquisition, had established a secret storehouse of gene seed belonging to the Sons of Dawn. Thousands of preserved capsules, enough to rebuild a chapter or destroy one. Even other Space Marines did not know it existed, but the Iron Warriors did. Not through prophecy or sorcery, but through cold forensic intelligence. Data intercepted, patterns noticed, logistics traced through obscure administratum chains. For the Iron Warriors, who had been fighting a 1,000-year grudge war against Dorne's descendants, this was more than an opportunity. It was vengeance incarnate. The warband that discovered the prize was led by Warsmith Kruger, now fully entrenched in his role as a sledgehammer of the Legion. Though brutal and unrefined, Kruger had ambition and the audacity to act on it. He wasn't content to harass the Imperium from the shadows. He wanted a statement. The prize was worth the risk, a chance to humiliate the Sons of Dawn, to rip their bloodline from the earth and torch it beneath iron boots. It wasn't enough to kill Space Marines. He would unmake them. The Iron Warriors came to Hydra Caudatus, not in silence but in fury. They launched an immediate orbital assault, catching the defenders mid-cycle. Orbital defenses were neutralized in hours, precision strikes obliterating the anti-void arrays before they could respond. Drop pods rained down in calculated intervals. Thousands of Iron Warriors, supported by demon engines, siege drills, and corrupted titans, began the systematic reduction of the surface. The fortress above the vault was the Cadmean Citadel, a name chosen in ancient remembrance, its origins lost to time. It was constructed as a final redoubt, overlapping fields of fire, redundant power systems, layered void shields. On paper, it was unbreakable. That suited the Iron Warriors perfectly. They didn't want an easy kill. Kruger organized the siege like a festival of annihilation. His artillery platforms were deployed in nested rings, each one calibrated to the Citadel's known tolerances. He had siege mortars dragged up from the underforges of Midrengard, archaic monstrosities that took hours to reload but could crack mountain ranges. He wasn't interested in negotiation or prisoners. He wanted a message burned into the walls of reality. The defenders, numbering just over 100,000 personnel, including several battalions of Skitarii and a core unit of the Adeptus Astartes, known as the Auric Sons, held firm. They were prepared for invasion. What they were not prepared for was Kroger's fury. The bombardment began on day 3 and did not stop for 20. No cycle of fire, no strategic pauses. Just constant, unrelenting saturation. Entire sections of the outer wall disappeared under crater fields. Promethium rivers ignited and ran like lava. Every few hours, a new type of shell was introduced. Some high yield, some radioactive, some carrying long-decayed viral strains. Sleep became impossible. Order difficult. The defenders began to break down, not through defeat, but exhaustion. When the walls finally cracked, it wasn't with a bang, but a groan, a grinding collapse of integrity, as if the world itself had grown tired of standing. Kroger sent in his vanguard, Terminators in cataphractii plate, demon-infused hell brutes, artillery walkers shaped like crustaceans, and vomiting magma from twisted maws. These were not forces of tactical restraint. They were punishment incarnate. The inner courtyards of the Cadmean Citadel turned into slaughter pits, walls blackened. Vox units screeched incomprehensible noise. Soldiers collapsed in heaps, burnt or buried or crushed. But the Iron Warriors didn't stop. They slowed, because now they faced the deeper levels. The vault. Imperial Fists' gene seed was kept under triple-layered null warding, shielded by magnetic fields, reinforced bunkers, and Mechanicus curse wards. The Iron Warriors had to move carefully, not because they feared traps, but because they wanted it intact. And so began a new kind of war, one not of destruction, but of precision dissection. Tunnel squads were deployed with seismic readers and graviton drills. Servitors mapped vault thresholds and employed controlled melta charges. Inch by inch, the Iron Warriors cut the fortress open, as one would peel back a skull to get at the brain. All the while, the defenders, fewer now but desperate, counterattacked. They flooded tunnels with promethium. They detonated fusion cores. One Skitarii Alpha detonated its own power cell inside an excavation chamber, killing 40 Iron Warriors. It wasn't enough. On day 43 of the siege, Kruger breached the vault. The gene seed storage was exactly as they had hoped, pristine, cryogenically preserved, untouched. Thousands of samples, each one marked with Imperial Fist chapter runes, each a symbol of what the Iron Warriors had sworn to hate since the heresy. Kruger stood before the cache for a long time, silent. He could have destroyed it. He didn't. Instead, he ordered it secured, removed in sections carefully, reverently, not because he respected it, but because he understood its power. This was not just gene seed. This was leverage, a weapon of future war, a tool to break not walls, but bloodlines. But Kruger wasn't the only one watching. Among his command staff, a figure stirred, one who had once served another. A lieutenant of Barban Falk, a hybrid of two legions. His name, Honsu. He had served well during the siege, brutal, efficient, opportunistic. And when the vaults were opened, he acted. Without warning, Honsu ordered the transport ships rerouted. He seized the gene seed under the pretense of moving it to a secure location. By the time Kruger realized what had happened, Honsu was gone. Gone with the prize. He had betrayed the betrayers. Kruger's fury was apocalyptic. He turned the remains of Hydra Caudatus into slag. Not a stone was left standing. The Adeptus Mechanicus data vaults were melted. The Mechanicum survivors executed. Even the air was poisoned. He left the world uninhabitable, just in case someone ever came looking. But the wound had already been dealt. The Imperium mourned the loss of the gene seed. The Imperial Fists swore vengeance. The Mechanicus initiated 20 years of silence. And the Iron Warriors, they marked Hydra Caudatus as a victory, but one soaked in betrayal. To this day, warbands speak of it not with pride, but with gritted teeth, because for all the brilliance of the siege, for all the slaughter and precision, the prize was stolen. Honsu would rise on the back of that theft, but that is another story. Hydra Caudatus remained behind, a dead world, a cautionary tale, a lesson in what happens when secrets are buried in stone, because in the end, no wall is safe. Not when the Iron Warriors are coming. There are Warsmiths who earn their title through centuries of battle, through sieges broken and fortresses toppled. There are others who inherit it, molded under the iron hand of Perturabo or one of his chosen. And then there is Honsu, the unlikeliest of them all. He was not forged in glory, nor lifted by lineage. Honsu clawed his way to power not by building walls, but by breaking every rule the Iron Warriors ever pretended to follow. His name carries a bitter taste, even among his own kind. Not because of what he is, but because of what he is not. Whole. Half of Honsu's gene seed comes from the Imperial Fists, his DNA spliced from a captured strain during one of the earliest skirmishes of the Long War. That alone should have sealed his fate. A corrupted son of Dawn housed in the body of an Iron Warrior. A contradiction. A paradox. In most warbands, he would have been executed as an abomination. But the Iron Warriors don't discard useful tools. They simply sharpen them harder. From the beginning, Honsu was watched. He fought with the fury of one who knew he didn't belong. He volunteered for the worst assignments. The trench holds, the long watches, the meat grinder assaults no warsmith wanted to waste veterans on. He didn't do it for honor. There was none to be found. He did it because he had to prove something. By the time of the siege of Hydra Cordatis, Hanso was already known as a survivor. Not a leader, not a visionary, but a dependable killer. Precise, disciplined, expendable. He served under Barb and Falk, whose warpsmith cabals had warped entire campaigns with forbidden weapons. Falk saw potential in Hanso, not because he admired him, but because he understood how to use him. During the Hydra campaign, Hanso operated as Falk's executioner. He led breach squads into fortified zones, bypassing Mechanicus defenses, deploying cursed breacher charges that opened space like wet cloth. He carved his way into the Cadmean citadel, dragging shattered defenders behind him, until finally he stood in the vault containing the greatest prize the Iron Warriors had seen in 10 millennia. Imperial Fist Gene Seed, untouched, unspoiled. And then came his moment. Falk, bloated with warp energy, ascended to demonhood before Hanso's eyes, a transformation that melted flesh and rewrote matter. One moment, Falk was Warsmith, the next a creature of screaming iron wings and warp light gone from the mortal world. In the void left behind, Kruger laid claim to the prize. Hanso disagreed. He made his move quickly, deftly. While Kruger orchestrated the destruction of the Cadmean citadel, Hanso diverted the gene seed transports, falsified orders, bribed a handful of greedy warpsmiths, and vanished into the warp with all of it. What he did wasn't a betrayal. It was ambition. The gene seed gave him something far more potent than weapons: identity. With it, he could create his own army. Not just a war band, but a new legacy, an echo of both Dawn and Perturabo, corrupted and redefined, a legion of his own. He vanished into the maelstrom where the warp swallows lesser men whole. There, on the demon world of New Badab, he began his next siege, not of fortresses, but of reputation. To outsiders, Hanso was a blasphemy, a half-breed, a pariah. But inside the Eye of Terror, where survival is power and fear is currency, Hanso began gathering forces. Not by force of tradition, but by offering something different. The promise of a new Iron Warrior ethos. One not beholden to the old grudges. One that sought domination, not just destruction. He began his experiments in secret. From the stolen gene seed, he raised a new breed of warriors, not true Astartes, but newborn, vat-grown hybrids twisted by warp energies and stitched together by demoncraft. Some were unstable, others horrifyingly effective. He called them the Demonculaba. It was a name that sent chills through even hardened traitors. The process was inhuman. Subjects were implanted into living vessels, hulking mutated female forms harvested from fallen worlds. The gene seed was forcibly incubated, the resulting spawn subjected to accelerated growth cycles, exposure to the warp, and invasive surgeries. Most died. The survivors became killers. Hanso didn't care about purity, he cared about results. With the Demonculaba, he built a force unlike any the Iron Warriors had fielded before. A mobile siege cadre capable of both attrition warfare and fast strikes, supported by demon engines, techno-horrors, and corrupted dreadnoughts. But he needed a target. He found one in Ultramar. The Iron Warriors had long despised the Ultramarines, but never had the strength to challenge them directly. Hanso, ever the strategist, chose a different path. Strike not at the head, but at the edges. He began a war of attrition against the outlying planets of Ultramar, attacking way stations, communication hubs, agricultural worlds. Not for resources, but for fear. The Ultramarines responded, rapidly, efficiently. And Hanso smiled, because it wasn't about winning. It was about drawing blood. His first major strike came at Medius, a supply world fortified with orbital arrays and garrisoned by elements of the Nova Marines. Hanso's forces bypassed the outer defenses, using ancient warp-folding corridors known only to demon princes. They arrived not at the gates, but within the walls. The planet burned in less than a week. But Hanso wasn't finished. He next turned his eye to Kalth, the site of the infamous Word-Bearer's betrayal during the heresy. The Ultramarines had rebuilt it, reclaimed it, a symbol of recovery. Hanso would make it bleed again. The attack on Kalth was methodical. His fleet entered real space under the shadow of a dying star. Warp storms blanketed the system. He unleashed the Anathame-class siege cruisers, warships built from the carcasses of dead star forts. He dropped orbital cannons on the surface like meteors. Then he descended personally. The siege was brutal. Kalth, already scarred by ancient trauma, cracked beneath the weight of Hanso's fury. He didn't just destroy its defenses. He defiled them, blessed them in the name of the dark gods, seeded the soil with demon spores, corrupted the water supply with sentient plagues. But it wasn't just vengeance. It was a message. The Iron Warriors were not dead. They had evolved. Kalth's defenders rallied. Uriel Ventris, captain of the 4th Company of the Ultramarines, returned to the world to halt Hanso's advance. Their duel became the centerpiece of the conflict, two warriors representing legacies of order and chaos, battling over the bones of a fallen world. Hanso lost, not because he was outmatched, he nearly killed Ventris, but because Kalth refused to die. Reinforcements arrived. The warp storm abated. Hanso, badly wounded, was forced to retreat into the Eye once more. But even in defeat, he won. Because his legend had been written in fire and blood. Hanso is not a builder. He is not a thinker like Forix or a war savant like Falk. He is a predator, born from hate, driven by defiance. His victories are not measured in banners planted, but in wounds left behind. He is the reflection of a legion that never knew peace, a creature born from the failure of two primarchs, Dawn and Perturabo, twisted into something new. The Iron Warriors once built fortresses to endure time. Hanso builds only to destroy, and the galaxy has not seen the last of him. No light shines on Medrengard, not starlight nor sun. No sky to speak of, just a churn of blackened clouds and warp-streaked lightning that hisses across an atmosphere so dense with ash it settles like snow. But this isn't nature. This is Perturabo's design, a planet of metal, smoke, and despair, carved not for beauty, but for permanence. This was the Iron Warriors' reward for their betrayal, a world shaped in their image. It is no sanctuary. It is no throne. It is a prison built by its inmates. When Horus fell and Terra was lost, when the traitor legions scattered before the fury of the Scouring, each retreated into the Eye of Terror, the rent in space where reality breaks and madness reigns. The Iron Warriors, ever pragmatic, did not vanish into insanity like the Emperor's children, nor pledge themselves utterly to a single god like the World Eaters. Perturabo still believed in order, in control, if not of the galaxy, then of what little remained to him. So he claimed Medrengard, a demon world granted by the Chaos Gods, not as a gift of affection but as a challenge. A place raw with untamed matter, mountains that shifted when unobserved, rivers that boiled with spite, and storms that screamed with half-formed thoughts. And Perturabo set to work. He did not create paradise. He built a fortress world, the culmination of every siege engine, trench line, artillery bastion, and fortified citadel ever imagined. Across its broken surface, he laid a lattice of war, as if daring the universe to come and break it. From orbit, Medrengard looks like a cracked cogwheel, every continent divided by defense networks, fortified canyons, and gridlocked manufactoria. Thousands of foundries churn day and night, birthing shells the size of drop pods, artillery carriages carved from corrupted adamantium, and siege drills mounted with demon-bound reactors. The air smells of burning lubricant and ozone. The ground is layered with rust and bone. There is no night. There is no day. There is only war being prepared. At the heart of the planet sits Kalengol, the Iron Warriors' capital. Not a city in the traditional sense, but a fortress mountain, an artificial range built atop a plateau of jet-black stone. Its battlements are measured in kilometers, its walls layered with void shielding and warp displacement plating. Portals to other realms are sealed beneath rune-locked chambers. At its apex sits Perturabo's old forge, abandoned now empty, a shrine to function with no soul. Because Perturabo is gone. After the siege of Tara and the near collapse of the traitor legions, the Primarch's path took him away from his sons. Some say he still walks Medrengard, hidden within its tectonic layers, shaping reality from beneath the crust. Others believe he entered the warp fully, trading flesh for eternal entropy. There are whispers that he became a demon prince and then vanished entirely, leaving no trace. But whether he rules or not, his world remains, and it is here that the Warsmiths gather. Medrengard is not united. The Iron Warriors never cared for hierarchy. With Perturabo absent, the Legion shattered into hundreds of warbands, each led by a Warsmith, each carving out their own section of the fortress world, like feudal lords with siege cannons. They are masters of their citadels, bound not by loyalty, but by shared origin and mutual threat. There is no Iron Council, no central authority. Only treaties of necessity, brokered in blast chambers or over data feeds laced with encrypted disdain. Warsmiths like Kroger, Honso, Toramino, and the now-dead Barossus have all carved domains on Medrengard's surface, each obsessed with their own projects. These are not cities, they are siege laboratories. In the west, the Forge of Toramino burrows into the crust, a vertical fortress descending miles underground. Here, demon engines are bred in flesh vats, and war machines are tested in rotating kill halls. Toramino himself is never seen without his servo-drone retinue, and his fortress is so heavily automated that it is said he speaks only to machines. In the blasted eastern steppes, Kroger's hold squats like a dead titan, thick, ugly, bristling with artillery. His warband maintains the largest concentration of siege armor on the planet, and his kill ratios during the raids on the Imperium's borders have earned him a bitter kind of reverence. But even his followers know the truth. Kroger rules through momentum. Without a war, his domain stagnates. And then there is the Vault of Chains, deep beneath the frozen northern wastes. Here, the remnants of the demonculaba process persist, tended by what remains of Honso's forces. Those who enter do not return. It is a place of birth and death, both equally horrific. Some say it is now empty. Others say it breeds the next generation of Iron Warriors, ones who will never remember Terra or Olympia. The rest of Medrengard is dotted with forgotten bastions, abandoned test ranges, and war zones where warsmiths pit warbands against each other to test new engines of destruction. There are no civilians, no ecology, just perpetual preparation. And while the surface boils with internal rivalries, orbit tells a different story. The Iron Ring. Constructed over millennia, it is a megastructure of orbital defense platforms, siege barges, and refitted space hulks, locked together into a defensive net so thick it can be seen from the Eye of Terror's rim. It is more than defense. It is territory, a sign to other traitor legions that the Iron Warriors will not be displaced. The ring bristles with macro batteries and warp cannons, some of them centuries old, others grown from the bones of demon worlds. Together they make Medrengard the most fortified planet in the Eye of Terror, and yet it is not safe, because the real danger on Medrengard isn't the Imperium, it is the Iron Warriors themselves. They cannot help but war. It is their nature to test, to improve, to destroy. When external enemies cannot be found, they turn inward. Fiefdoms shift constantly. Alliances collapse. Betrayals happen in silence. There are duels between Warsmiths that never make it to record. Fortress sabotage carried out by corrupted servitors, rivalries that stretch across centuries and are paid in bolter shells and orbital strikes. Still, the forges burn. Still, new siege weapons are tested. Still, Medrengard prepares for a war that may never come. Because for the Iron Warriors, that is the point. They do not seek redemption. They do not dream of terror. They do not long for victory in the way other legions do. They want the walls to rise so they can tear them down. And on Medrengard, walls rise every day. Every trench is a memory, every cannon a statement, every fortress a lie waiting to be exposed. This world is not a reward. It is a reflection of Perturabo's genius, his bitterness, his perfectionism turned inward. His sons have not changed it. They simply survive within it, killing each other in the name of a primarch who abandoned them, sharpening weapons for wars they may never fight. Because Medrengard is not a place you live, it is a place you endure. And it is the only home the Iron Warriors will ever know. There are weapons, and then there are warnings. The Iron Circle were never simply machines. They weren't tools to be wielded, nor mere constructs of steel and motive force. They were a message, a towering, thundering embodiment of Perturabo's will. Not shouted, not reasoned, just delivered, like a siege round to the face. To understand the Iron Circle is to understand Perturabo, not the version filtered through history or imperial bias, but the truth behind the numbers, the geometry, the bitter fury of a primarch who never forgot how he was used. Created during the latter half of the Great Crusade, the Iron Circle was born not out of necessity, but control. By that point, Perturabo had ceased to trust anything he could not measure. His generals argued, his captains second-guessed, his legionaries made mistakes. So he built something that wouldn't. Each automaton in the Iron Circle was a Domitar-class battle automata, modified far beyond the Mechanicum's tolerances. Heavily augmented, they stood nearly 4 meters tall, shaped like armored cyclopes, thick-shouldered and mono-eyed, each one bearing a siege hammer that could crater tank armor in a single blow. But it wasn't the hammers, or the reactor cores, or the armor-plated fists that made them terrifying. It was their silence. The Iron Circle did not speak. They obeyed. Where Perturabo went, they followed. In tight formation, servo motors purring, thudding footsteps shaking the ground. They flanked him at every war council. They stood behind him during negotiations. When other primarchs brought honor guards, decked in finery and laurels, Perturabo brought 6 machines with no emotion and no mercy. They didn't just protect him. They represented everything he believed in. Each automaton was imprinted with a fraction of Perturabo's own battle algorithms. Not just logic trees or command directives, but mathematical simulations of his siege doctrine. They were designed to analyze incoming threats, calculate field weaknesses, and respond with overwhelming targeted force. On the battlefield, they didn't fight like automata. They fought like extensions of Perturabo's will, calibrated to within milliseconds of his thought. They were perfect, and they made everyone else uncomfortable. Even among the Iron Warriors who revered machinery over flesh, there was something off about them. Some whispered that they weren't automata at all, that they contained bound intelligences, psychic echoes, even demon cores sealed within pseudo-logical prison code. There were reports, rare but consistent, of the Iron Circle moving before orders were given, responding to threats no one else saw, killing men for saying the wrong thing too close to their master. They were supposed to be emotionless, and yet they seemed angry. The Iron Circle took to the field only when Perturabo did. They weren't deployed independently. They weren't lent to Warsmiths. They didn't fight for glory or recognition. When they were seen, it meant one thing. The Primarch himself had come to destroy you. One of their earliest appearances was at the Siege of Talon, the largest armored conflict in Imperial history. The Iron Warriors, flushed with warp-forged strength and bitterness from the heresy's early betrayals, launched a surprise assault on the desert world, intending to break its defenses and uncover ancient vaults buried beneath the sands. Perturabo arrived to oversee the campaign personally, and with him came the Iron Circle. The deserts of Talon were blasted and broken, pocked with shell craters, the air choked with radioactive storms. Armored divisions clashed across continents. Titans strode like gods of old. But when the Iron Circle entered the field, the tide changed. Witnesses, few and mostly dead, described them smashing through Imperial tank formations with brutal finality. One swing from their siege hammers could turn a Lehman Russ to twisted scrap. Infantry were simply pulverized. They moved in sync, like dancers choreographed to the rhythm of artillery. Where Perturabo walked, they formed a wall of steel. Snipers who tried to target him found themselves killed not by return fire, but by the sudden impact of an Iron Circle member crushing them into dust. But not all wars were so distant. At the Siege of Terra, during the final assault on the Imperial Palace, the Iron Circle returned in force. By then, Perturabo's hatred of his brother Dorn had reached its peak. The palace, designed and reinforced by Dorn's hand, was a direct insult to everything Perturabo believed. Every wall, every tower, every defensive layer screamed defiance. It wasn't just a structure, it was a challenge. One Perturabo could not ignore. As he led the Iron Warriors against the walls of the Saturnine Gate, he unleashed the Iron Circle not as bodyguards, but as battering rams. They smashed bastions open with their fists. They threw wrecked tanks at defense lines. They tunneled into substructure levels, dragging out loyalist defenders and reducing them to paste. During one assault, an Imperial Fist dreadnought, ancient, storied, a hero of a dozen campaigns, met a member of the Iron Circle head-on. The Iron Circle automaton did not slow. The dreadnought fired plasma bursts at point-blank range. The Iron Circle member absorbed them in its reinforced chest plate, surged forward and ripped the dreadnought apart, piece by piece, like a child tearing wings off a fly. There was no roar, no exultation, just purpose. Still, they were not invincible. At Saturnine, they met resistance they hadn't anticipated. Rogel Dorn himself, leading a counterstrike, brought a cadre of Imperial Fists to bear against Perturabo and his guard. The two Primarchs never quite reached each other, trapped in a war of trenches and redirecting fury. But two members of the Iron Circle were destroyed during that campaign, reduced to molten fragments by vortex grenades and graviton implosions. Perturabo said nothing, but he had those fragments gathered, catalogued, and entombed within Kalin Gol, each placed in a sealed alcove, not with reverence but with finality. Failures logged for eternity. After the heresy, the Iron Circle faded from the records. Perturabo withdrew from the material realm, the Eye of Terror swallowing his presence. Some believed the Iron Circle were deactivated, stored beneath Medran Guard's crust in vaults made of psychic obsidian. Others whispered that they were destroyed, no longer needed or perhaps feared even by their creator. But the truth, like much of chaos, is less tidy. They were not gone. Fragments of data captured in the augur logs of rogue traders and Black Legion scouts speak of titanic constructs glimpsed at the edge of battles, guarding warp portals, standing sentinel at cursed fortresses, waiting, always waiting. Warsmiths who have risen too far, too fast, have sometimes vanished without explanation, leaving only scorched ruins behind, their warbands decapitated. The pattern, some say, is always the same: seismic footprints, electromagnetic silence, and precise annihilation. Some believe the Iron Circle were never deactivated. They are simply asleep, slumbering beneath Medrengard, locked behind layers of logic gates, rune seals, and command protocols that only one voice can trigger. Perturabo's voice. And though that voice has not been heard in millennia, the Iron Warriors believe, no fear, that one day he will return. Not as a man, not as a demon, but as a force of reckoning. And when he does, the Iron Circle will awaken. Not for protection, but for punishment. Because they were never guards. They were always the executioners. There are few names among the Iron Warriors spoken with such cold, clinical dread as that of Toromino. Not because of the scale of his wars, nor the volume of his destruction, but because of how he thought. Where others ruled through wrath or dominance, Toromino ruled through architecture. Where most warsmiths tore down fortresses to make statements, he did it to understand them. To him, a citadel was never just a barrier, it was a language, one he would rewrite in steel and death. Before the heresy, he was barely known, a quiet presence within the 4th Legion, often deployed to secondary theaters, tasked with analyzing captured defenses or drafting breach plans for sieges that never needed glory, just results. He avoided the cliques of the Legion, never allied himself with Forex, Falk, or Kroger. He surrounded himself with silence, data, and increasingly advanced machine constructs of his own design. When the Great Crusade entered its final decades, Perturabo began to take notice. Not because Toromino asked to be seen, but because his plans never failed. It was on the Albec Rift that he earned his reputation. The Iron Warriors were stalled outside a Xenobastion for 43 days, burning siege platforms and bodies alike trying to gain ground. The other warsmith in command, a brutalist named Sestral, was preparing a final saturation bombardment when Toromino submitted a counter-proposal. A sequential demolition of underground fault locks running beneath the fortress's roots. He submitted the seismic data, provided 5 alternate breach routes, and listed a timeline to collapse the inner spires in under 12 hours. Sestrel laughed. Toromino executed the plan without approval. 11 hours later, the Xeno stronghold imploded into itself, and the breach was secured with fewer than 20 casualties. Perturabo promoted Toromino the following cycle, citing his unemotional application of inevitability. He was given command of a grand battalion and never lost it. After the siege of Terra and the retreat into the Eye of Terror, many of the Iron Warriors devolved into squabbling, each carving out their corners of Medrengard or the wider warp realms like petty warlords. Toromino did not. He selected his territory with the same methodical gaze he applied to battlefield calculations. A mountainous slab of tortured geology in Medrengard's eastern hemisphere, uncut, volatile, rich in subterranean vaults. It was there that he constructed what would become known among the Iron Warriors as the Spiral Bastion. No one else on Medrengard built like it. Most war fortresses were towering things, spiked monoliths of iron and demonic plating, symbols of defiance and ego. Toromino's fortress was invisible. From orbit it barely registered, a plateau of dark stone. But buried beneath it were miles of automated foundries, shifting test ranges, labyrinthine sublevels that changed alignment based on who entered them. He designed it with reactive architecture, walls that moved, corridors that misled, automated kill zones that calibrated themselves to the equipment and gait of any intruder. It wasn't just a fortress, it was a machine. Toramino's obsession wasn't conquest, it was understanding. He captured enemy war machines and dissected them, sometimes while they still functioned. He rerouted the decay of ancient ordinati into new weapon forms. He sought not demonhood, not immortality, but refinement. He believed that war, like any science, could be perfected. And for that, he needed variables. He began importing captives, not slaves, test data. He collected surviving imperial fists, iron hands, skitari, even word-bearers, not to interrogate them, but to study how they died. He subjected them to simulated siege conditions, unleashing war machines built to exploit the vulnerabilities of their training doctrines. A start-stop process, constantly refined. Each death was catalogued, recorded, cross-referenced with architectural models and battlefield algorithms. Failure wasn't loss. Failure was feedback. Some called him a heretic. Others simply left him alone. Warsmiths like Kruger mocked his isolation, but none dared challenge him, because none returned from his fortress, and more importantly, because Toramino rarely interfered with others. Until he did. It was during the War of the Maelstrom Teeth that Toramino intervened. Kruger's forces had begun a slow-burning conquest of the border worlds near the Warp Rift, butchering Mechanicus cults and destabilizing a region of warp lanes critical to several Iron Warrior supply chains. When warned, Kruger ignored it. When confronted, he dared Toramino to stop him. Toramino didn't send an army. He sent a map, a detailed breakdown of Kruger's fortifications on the 6th planet of the sector. Weak points, power grid stress markers, rotational gaps in orbital surveillance. It was addressed to another warsmith, one of Kruger's rivals. The fortress fell within 4 hours. Toramino never took credit. He simply updated his files. He had no interest in politics, no desire for rank. He didn't attend the rare conclaves that formed between the greater warbands. But even among the Iron Warriors, a legion known for mistrust and iron-fisted logic, Toramino was considered alien. He had replaced much of his body with modular bionics, not crude graphs or demon-sculpted limbs, hyper-specialized tools, interchangeable systems, cognition uplinks that ran multiple thought processes in parallel. He didn't speak often. When he did, it was in tactical arrays and solution codes. Some whispered he had gone beyond transhumanity, that he no longer dreamed, that he hadn't felt anything in centuries. If that was true, it was by design. The last known sighting of Toramino came during the siege of Iohannis Reach, an imperial naval depot nestled into an artificial hollow of a dead moon. The Imperium believed the depot unassailable. Even the Black Legion had failed to take it, losing 2 cruisers to overlapping void mines and warp flak. The Imperium boasted about it in their propaganda broadcasts. Toramino never spoke a word in reply. He simply arrived. He did not deploy an army. No planet-wide bombardment. No threats. He landed in silence, set up 6 siege projectors across the moon's magnetic equator, and then nothing. For 12 hours, Imperial augurs tracked low-level fluctuations, no energy spikes, no troop movement. Then, gravity inverted. Not metaphorically, physically. The lunar core collapsed in on itself. The station, its orbital defenses, and every structure on its surface were dragged down through its own crust, compressed into a pit of impossible density. When Imperial reinforcements arrived, all they found was a perfectly symmetrical crater, 30 kilometers wide, radiating no heat. There were no survivors. When asked how he had done it, Toramino reportedly replied with a single phrase, adjusted the variable. No battle, no casualties, just deletion. Since then, Toromino has not been seen. Some believe he sealed himself inside the spiral bastion, perfecting a new kind of siege weapon that doesn't break walls, but removes the need for them. Others say he ascended, not to demonhood, but something stranger, a machine thought, a siege logic pattern woven into the very data stream of the Eye of Terror, a living algorithm with no form, only function. The truth remains unknown. But among the Iron Warriors, Toromino's name is uttered with something that resembles caution, because in a legion full of monsters and butchers, he was something worse. He was a thinker, and thinkers don't need armies to win wars, just time. The Iron Warriors were never bred for speed. They were not the striking blade of the Emperor's wrath, like the White Scars, nor the Angels of Shock and Awe, like the Blood Angels. They were made to last, to endure, to outlive the enemy by refusing to break. While other legions burned bright, the Iron Warriors burned slow, grinding their enemies down not in moments of inspiration, but in centuries of persistence. In the millennia since the Siege of Terra, it is this quality, their unrelenting refusal to die, that has defined their long war. They did not vanish into the warp like ghosts. They did not retreat into madness like so many of their traitor brethren. The Iron Warriors remained active, deliberately and ruthlessly prosecuting wars of attrition wherever the Imperium's defenses were thickest. They did not seek worlds of legend or vaults of power. They sought resistance. They sought walls, because every wall eventually breaks. In the years immediately following the heresy, their numbers thinned. The loyalist counter-crusades pushed the traitor legions back with fury, driving many into the Eye of Terror. Some broke apart under the weight of their defeats, others splintered into fanatics and demon cults. But the Iron Warriors, bitter and practical, adapted. Those who survived the scouring reorganized their battalions into autonomous warbands, many orbiting around their Warsmiths like shards of fractured doctrine. From these splinters, the first Iron Phalanxes were born, not as formalized structures, but as a wartime necessity. These were not legions. They were mobile, modular siege groups capable of operating for decades behind enemy lines, each one structured for a specific objective: infrastructure disruption, logistical attrition, long-term planetary denial. The Phalanxes did not occupy worlds. They poisoned them, turned them into corpses of strategy. Cities were mined and left to rot. Supply lines bled out over years. Civilizations choked in the slow grip of calculated decay. One such war, a conflict never entered into Imperial archives, was the campaign of Iadris Theta, a minor agri-system vital to the food supply of Segmentum Solar's outer reach. The Iron Warriors didn't assault it directly. Instead, they seeded its upper atmosphere with self-replicating debris fields made to mimic civilian satellites. They disrupted trade traffic with automated Vox beacons mimicking distress signals. They redirected meteor impacts using controlled void mining rigs captured in earlier raids. It took 12 years. By the end, Iadris Theta was dead. Not by blade, not by bombardment, but by isolation. That is what makes the Iron Warriors terrifying. Not their size, not their power, but their ability to wait. Over the centuries, they perfected this model. Their Warsmiths, Falk, Forex, Kruger, Toromino, Honso, developed parallel styles of siege projection. Some focused on planetary extermination, others on precision. Some, like the elusive Warsmith Atranaxis, experimented with temporal warfare, testing long-range warp jumps to outmaneuver Imperial supply chains decades before they stabilized. Their methodology fractured with time, but the core doctrine remained untouched. If the enemy has a wall, break it. If the enemy has a plan, unmake it. If the enemy has hope, erase it. They became particularly feared during the Sabbathine Purge, a now classified campaign against the Macarian sector. When the Iron Warriors fell upon the fortress world of Castrum 71, the Imperium responded with standard doctrine. Deploy the Imperial Guard, reinforce with Mechanicus artillery, and erect layered planetary shields. What they didn't understand, what they still fail to understand, is that to the Iron Warriors, resistance is an invitation. Castrum 71 held out for 80 days, not because of superior firepower, but because the Iron Warriors wanted it to. They used the siege as a live experiment, testing the degradation of Imperial morale across different regiments, monitoring communication collapse once orbital uplinks were severed, and refining saturation bombardment angles against shield harmonics. They did not kill the planet. They exhausted it. By the time the final gate fell, the surviving defenders were inviting the shells. This approach defined their role in the Long War, where the Black Legion struck with fury, the Night Lords with terror, and the Word-Bearers with corruption. The Iron Warriors remained what they had always been, a crucible. The most terrifying proof of this came in the Iron Scar campaign, a little-known but strategically devastating assault carried out against the Forge World Helos Thanax. The world had been reinforced with the help of the Adeptus Mechanicus, its surface girded with void-hardened bastions and orbital tracking towers. The Fabricator General of the region declared it impregnable. He even invited representatives from other sectors to observe its defensive protocols. The Iron Warriors arrived during the ceremony. They did not announce their presence with a fleet. Instead, they tunneled. For 12 standard years, a Warsmith known only as the Gaunt Architect used subwarp drill vectors to approach the Forge world from beneath the crust, bypassing orbital surveillance entirely. By the time Helos Thanax detected the incursion, they were already compromised. Turrets failed to fire, cogitators froze, shell bunkers collapsed into seismic chasms as siege drills melted the bedrock into rivers of molten steel. The planet's defenders tried to flee. There was nowhere to run. The planet didn't explode. It folded, re-engineered by Toramino's successors, into a planetary trap. The crater where Helos Thanax once stood still bleeds vox static to this day. Imperial historians do not record these wars, not because they are secrets, but because they are shameful. Because they are proof that the Iron Warriors never stopped. That they are still out there, not raving in warp temples or dueling for demonhood, but working, testing, refining, preparing. Their attacks rarely come with warning. Sometimes a world simply vanishes from the astropathic grid. Sometimes a relief fleet arrives to find nothing but crater fields and bunkers melted to slag. Sometimes the only warning is a single data packet, coordinates and timestamps sent from a forgotten frequency embedded in a Mechanicus subroutine. The Iron Warriors never ask for terms. They never boast. They simply do what they were made to do. Even today, 10,000 years since the heresy, the scars of their siegecraft shape the Imperium. In the Segmentum Obscurus, dozens of fortress worlds exist solely because of past Iron Warrior campaigns. Each one is built in reaction to something they destroyed. In some cases, the engineers responsible for rebuilding Imperial bastions unknowingly used Toramino's math, stolen from recovered data slates or decrypted kill logs. In Segmentum Tempestus, certain guard regiments are trained using simulated Iron Warrior doctrines, taught to expect attrition over annihilation. Even then, they often fail, not because the Iron Warriors outgun them, but because they know exactly how long it will take for a man to break under pressure. And in the Eye of Terror on Medringard and beyond, the war continues. Warsmiths rise and fall. Fortresses change hands. Machines are improved, tactics refined. Each warband tests something new, orbital drop drills, siege demons grafted into mining chassis, armor plating grown from necrotized warp matter. Some of these experiments fail, some collapse into horror, but some work, and when they do, they are deployed, not with fanfare, not with banners, just with the cold, simple precision of a legion that was never meant to inspire, but to endure. Because the Iron Warriors do not win wars the way others do. They do not claim thrones. They do not raise champions. They do not need to. They just keep marching, and sooner or later, everything breaks. When the galaxy speaks of the Iron Warriors, it speaks of artillery, of siege engines, of bunkers ground to ash and citadels gutted by methodical fury. But not all wars are fought with shells and ruin. Some are fought in whispers, some are measured in infection rather than impact. And among the Iron Warriors there exists a figure who embodies that philosophy, not through overt strength, but through a quieter, insidious kind of warfare. Warsmith Shon-Tu, a name not shouted in the war halls of Medrengard, but spoken like a warning, low, clipped with caution. Because Shon-Tu does not command with presence, he does not sit upon a throne of guns. He moves in the empty spaces between decisions, the silence after orders are given, the vacuum left behind when a commander dies, and no one can prove why. He is a warsmith, yes, but not like the others. His path to that title was never made public. There is no battle listed where he earned command, no duels logged in the volatile hierarchies of Medrengard's countless fiefdoms. His name began appearing in fragmentary transmissions during the later stages of the 36th millennium, always linked to unexplained collapses in loyalist defenses. His warband had no heraldry, no Vox signature, no established deployments. But where they operated, the signs were unmistakable. Command chains shattered from within, fortresses locked down and purged without siege, entire garrisons self-destructing in panic. It was not coincidence. It was Shon-Tu. The first true record of him comes from an inquisitorial archive recovered from the shattered remains of the space station Golgotha Triune. The station's destruction had originally been blamed on Dark Eldar raids, its hull torn open, internal gravity reversed, data cores extracted mid-combat. But recovered surveillance footage showed something else. It showed a space marine, hulking, dark-armored, but lacking the hazard stripes of most Iron Warriors. His armor was worn, scorched black. His helm was featureless, save for a single red eye lens. He said nothing. He issued no threats. He walked through automatic doors without breaking stride, as if they knew to open for him. In his wake, loyalists turned on each other. Cogitators exploded from within. Emergency seals activated without cause, trapping defenders behind bulkheads that refused to acknowledge command overrides. The entire station turned against its crew. Shon-Tu had not besieged Golgotha Triune. He had rewritten it. Unlike the more prominent Warsmiths, Kroger with his brute assaults, Han So with his half-blood ambition, Shon-Tu's genius lay in contagion. Not biological, but systemic. His warband, known only by its internal designation, Steel Ghosts, were masters of infiltration. Not stealth in the conventional sense. They did not skulk in shadows. They moved in plain sight, wearing compromised IFF codes, broadcasting loyalist frequencies, and wielding the same tactical formations as Astra Militarum and Skitarii garrisons. By the time they were recognized as Iron Warriors, it was already too late. Where Toromino rewrote war through architecture, Shon-Tu did it through identity. His most infamous campaign came during the siege of Maladrax Prime, an old fortress world held by the Death Watch. It was a death sentence on paper, 6 watch fortresses, 3 layered defense moons, and full anti-orbital saturation coverage. the kind of installation that even the Black Legion ignored out of pragmatism. Shon Tu didn't attack it. He joined it. Details remain classified by the Inquisition, but fragmented logs suggest that Shon Tu's warband infiltrated the command structure by replacing elements of the Imperial Guard security fleet over the course of 25 years. They mimicked fleet behaviors, rotated units subtly, corrupted Vox channels not with blasphemy, but with misinformation. By the time the defenders realized, Shon Tu controlled the planetary defense codes. He didn't launch a bombardment. He turned the world off. Airlocks purged command bunkers. Reactor cores overloaded in sequence. Kill teams were sealed into cryopods and launched into orbit with falsified withdrawal orders. By the time the Adeptus Astartes reinforcements arrived, Malodrax Prime wasn't under siege. It was silent, not destroyed, not ruined, just empty. What makes Shon Tu terrifying isn't power, it's patience. He fights wars over decades, sometimes centuries. He understands that victory isn't always earned with overwhelming firepower. It can be achieved by becoming the thing your enemy defends until their defense becomes your weapon. Even among the Iron Warriors, this approach draws suspicion. Warsmiths like Kruger and Barban Falk despised him. They considered his tactics cowardice, but they couldn't argue with the results. Shon Tu's warband suffered fewer casualties than any other known Iron Warrior force in the Eye of Terror. He did not expend lives, he used systems. He didn't rage against the walls of the Imperium.